Good afternoon to you. Mark Stout with HurricaneTrack.com here. It is Monday, August 7th, 2023, and on the update today, we're going to take a look at whether or not El Nino, the abnormal warming of the Pacific that we have heard a lot about, is that the reason why we don't have anything happening in the Atlantic Basin? Short answer, no, it is not. But you have to stick around and watch the rest of the video. I'm not a YouTube ad. You can't skip me. Come on. You got to hear the reasons why, and I'll present that to you throughout the rest of the update, or at least a part of it. Also, we'll take a look at what's happening in the tropics. There's a few things to talk about here and there. And maybe the most important thing, and I perhaps should have put it at the front of the video, but it is hurricane season, so hurricanes get top billing right now, at least the topic of hurricanes. But we do have a major severe weather outbreak that is going to happen for a good deal of the mid-Atlantic, including the I-95 corridor through areas like Fredericksburg, Virginia, all the way up towards Baltimore, Maryland, and many points in between. I do want to at least acknowledge that and take a look at it in case you are hearing about it first right here. It's important, so we'll discuss it and other stuff. All right, let's get started. First of all, yes, there is an El Nino, the abnormal warming of the equatorial Pacific. There it is. Not particularly strong yet. It's trying to get there, but there's all kinds of competing forces that are not allowing it to just go gangbusters very quickly. And as you are well aware, we also have this very warm Atlantic, and then the rest of the northern hemisphere oceans are just absurdly warm overall in most locations. But it is this El Nino that's gotten a lot of attention and a lot of speculation as to whether or not it is causing the lack of activity over here in the Atlantic Basin. So let me just quickly try to explain why would an El Nino in the Pacific affect Atlantic hurricane activity. The easiest way to explain it, the El Nino typically gives us more rising motion, more convection. Those are thunderstorms out over the ocean in this situation. And that rising air goes up, it spreads out, it creates wind shear, so you could get a lot of rising motion down here. I'll try to draw 3D on a flat graphic, and then those winds spread out across the tropical Atlantic and the Caribbean as such. And then you got your tropical waves that come across this way. They run into that wind shear and they get torn apart. Or that air is dry and sinking sometimes, but that's not always the case. In other words, El Nino doesn't automatically shut off an Atlantic hurricane season, and we can look back and see, well, right now we're not having a lot of wind shear. There's some, and there is a lot of dry air, but it's not coming from the El Nino. So again, no, the El Nino is not causing the quietness in the Atlantic, not yet, but it could get there as we move on through the rest of August into September and beyond. We'll just have to wait and see. But yeah, there it is. There's the stage. There's our El Nino. Let's look and see what some other people are saying about the overall subject. Andy Hazelton down at the Hurricane Research Division had this to say about it. And he was mentioning this many times early in the spring and early summer, that the climate models were suggesting that the El Nino would not have much of an impact on the Atlantic. And he was skeptical of that. Well, we'll see about that, he was saying, paraphrasing. But here you go. This is real time, right? This is what he said yesterday, August 6th. We are definitely fortunate that moisture and subsidence, I'll explain that in just a minute. You know what moisture is, but subsidence, we'll get to that. And wave structure, that's the tropical waves, are preventing much development in the main development region at the moment because the climate model forecasts for atypical El Nino favorable upper level patterns seem to be verifying so far this August. That is very important. Most of the climate modeling was suggesting that the typical unfavorable upper level pattern that El Nino produces wouldn't be there this August. And Andy was like, well, I'll believe it when I see it. Well, here it is. He's acknowledging that the atypical or more favorable pattern is in fact in place. So what about that word subsidence? That means sinking. So for whatever reason, we're getting a lot of dry, sinking air, higher pressure, kind of pushing down, right, like a bicycle pump, and that does not allow rising air. And you got to have that rising air for a number of reasons. That helps with convection, That's exactly what convection is that rising air. And the sinking air also just makes the overall environment drier. When you sink and compress that air, it dries out, and you must have, very important, a moist mid-levels portion of the atmosphere. And we're just not seeing that. There's not a real good answer as to why. Where is it coming from? But we've seen this pretty much in place over the deep tropics. Hold on to your hats for this one. Since about 2012, it was after the 2010 hurricane season that everything was really crazy out there. We had a very big season that year overall, 19 named storms that year. 2011 was a La Nina year, but after all that, we didn't have a lot of deep tropical development to speak of until all the way into 2017 when things got very busy. You remember, of course you do, we had Irma, we had Jose out there, and it was a very busy season for ACE and intensity and damage and everything in 2017. But something has happened over the last decade or so in this part of the Atlantic Basin that's just making it drier and more stable. And then this year, and even last year too, the tropical waves are coming off, and they're just longer, like they're stretched out more. It's harder for them to bundle up, and they're just having issues. None of that is blamed and can be traced to El Nino. It just can't. It's not a symptom of what we normally see in El Nino years. So there you go, an interesting tweet from Mr. Hazelton. Then Michael Lowry, very interesting post here. If you check off the boxes, the third one, you got to have all of them. You really do. You got the very warm sea surface temperatures. We've been over that over and over and over. Fairly light overall shear. Remember, El Nino typically makes a lot of shear across this area. That has not been the case this year. And but the dry, sinking, and stable air, nope, that's not. That's an X in the box. You cannot check that one off as being favorable. That's the point here of his post. So yes, we do have these big tropical waves that are coming off. They get a lot of attention on social media and message boards like Storm 2K, people messaging me, and hey, that's fine. We all talk about it, but then they go poof. They literally are getting squashed. And I like how he puts that there. Sinking air, squashing development. You have to have lower pressure, rising air, and a more moist atmosphere. But the reason why all this is happening is hard to pinpoint. But the fact is, it is keeping things nice and quiet. Now, one thing that I have noticed over the last maybe 5 to 10 years, something like that, I haven't exactly obsessed over this, but it just seems, if I think back, maybe the season is just a suggestion, is shifting a little bit because, hey, climate change in and of itself is always happening. Take the mankind stuff, do with it what you will, the natural variabilities, all of that is intermixed, absolutely. But the Earth is not stagnant. Things do change, and even 5 to 10 years, not a very long time on the geologic scale, but there have been subtle changes. Maybe the season is shifting a little bit later, so maybe later in August, instead of the 15th or the 20th, maybe it's more like the 30th or the first week of September starts to get more favorable in the Atlantic because the atmosphere is overall warmer. And warmer air, yes, it holds more moisture, but also warmer, drier air takes longer to moisten up. The ability to hold moisture is there, but you still have to fill that air with moisture, and maybe it just takes longer now. I don't know. That's just a hypothesis of mine. Looking back at these last several seasons, it seems like we're starting later, and the seasons are lasting longer into October. And you guys on the Gulf Coast know that all too well. You think about Michael and 2018 as an example. Even 2017, Nate there in October. 2020, an exceptional year. We had hurricanes, Zeta was there all the way near Halloween, for goodness sakes. Anyhow, interesting observation here from Michael Lowry. All right, another one from Michael Lowry, citing his and my mutual friend, Brian Norcross, and of course Brian Norcross working with us over at Fox Weather. A very, very good, solid, well thought out write-up here Just amazing. You guys should read this. I will put a link to it in today's update. His bottom line, what Brian was talking about, is that looking at this year versus last year, there are some similarities in terms of where are all these hurricanes that we were told are coming, but the 2 years are very, very different overall. And maybe as we get towards September, as he talks about in his update, things would become much more active, and they can happen very quickly. Things can happen so fast, one day to the next, the atmosphere just says, I'm ready! And we can't necessarily see that in the modeling. It's just, models are not forecasts, they're just guidance. They are a piece of the overall puzzle. So just another interesting observation from somebody who's been in the business a long time and knows generally what they are talking about, and I think more importantly, what to look for. All right? Finally, this came out the other day. I saw a lot of fanfare about it over on social media and at Storm 2K. Yakov here really explaining it really well. What am I talking about? Well, the ECMWF seasonal guidance came out, and it was calling for what people thought was a slash of half of the hurricane forecast for the season. But what people weren't realizing it was that it was for September on. And there was a lot of hemming and hawing about it. Oh, the season's not going to be anywhere near what people thought, which, hey, that still might be the case. Nobody knows for sure. But you have to put your analytical mind to it and unpack and figure out what's really going on. And this tweet thread here from Yakov really explains it. 2 important things to keep in mind, he said, from the ECMWF Atlantic Hurricane Season Outlook, the one that just came out. And again, it's computer generated. It's not a guy, that like writes it up. It's computer generated ensembles and a lot of complicated stuff. And you get this forecast with maps and numbers and ace predictions and so forth. It came out over the weekend, and again, a lot of people were like, whoa, look at that, half the season that we thought it was going to be. Not so much. So he goes on to say, the Euro, the ECMWF Hurricane Seasonal Skill for August, is much worse for whatever reason than for the July forecasts. Note the correlation between the forecast observed hurricanes for July forecast is 0.53, which is pretty good, and for August, it's 0.31. And if you know your statistics, that is significant. He goes on to say further, in its August forecast, the ECMWF has forecast normal to below normal hurricanes every single year since 2012. I mean, that's all you need to know. And, last year, okay, that was weird. We had a very strange setup last year, but even 2020, it under forecast significantly. I remember that. And there were years where it was saying there was going to be an El Nino, and El Nino, and El Nino, and that never happened. The Euro does well on some things, not so well on its hurricane seasonal forecasting. If you want to read this yourself, it's a very long set of tweets here in Yakov's thread, but it is really interesting, and it's packed with real data that he looked up and presented here for us to peruse, and that is very helpful. So yes, the Euro forecast was interesting, but just like when it says, oh, it's going to be a hyperactive season, you just don't know for sure. I will say this, it is interesting that the UK Met office, they came out just the other day, it was like the 1st or so of August, and it's still calling for a very robust season. And Colorado State University, Dr. Klotzbach's update the other day, still holding on to that very busy season idea. The Euro just doesn't do too well kind of once it's at the precipice of the start of the most active part of the season. So just keep that in mind. And it doesn't matter, it only takes one. Right, Southwest Florida, you guys know all that very well. It's true. You could just have one Ian wherever you live, or one Laura, or whatever the case may be, and that's what we need to be watching out for when it all comes down to it, right? All right, so in the Atlantic, yes, we've got these tropical waves. There they are, but they're kind of large and spread out and kind of diffuse. We've got the dry air in here. Not a lot of dust overall. It's not the African dust choking things off. It's just the mid-level dry air. Hurricane hunters went out and did some research out here. I think it was yesterday or the day before, something like that. The relative humidity out there, very low in the mid-levels of the atmosphere. A lot of that does come off of Africa from the Sahara, and you get that mid-level dry slot out here, and it just takes time for it to get worked out of the atmosphere. Just like if you had a steamed up mirror in the bathroom after you took a nice hot shower and you turn on that the hair dryer. I know this is kind of the reverse of dry air getting moist, but it takes a little bit of time, right? You turn that hair dryer on to unsteam the mirror. It's not instant. It takes time. So think of that in reverse. This dry pattern just takes a while, and maybe a little longer, that the atmosphere overall is warmer. And remember, the capacity to hold moisture increases when the atmosphere is warmer. Warm air holds more moisture. So, and why? Because the molecules of air are farther apart when the atmosphere is warmer. And so it might just take longer to saturate it. Hey, just trying to think, what are some of the reasons here? And I think logically, that at least makes sense. You know, I'm not just making stuff up. I mean, that just seems to make sense. All right, in the Eastern Pacific, there's Eugene, came and went very quickly. There's just not much moisture there. It might try to come back towards the near California, but I don't know. That's really stretching it. A little low-level moisture could be left over. Otherwise, the monsoon out here and whatnot, not very active right now. A few random thunderstorms, especially in southeastern Arizona. At least we're not at the 120 degrees, 115 every day kind of pattern everywhere. That seems to have broken down a little bit. And then really nothing else in the pipeline in the near future, but the Pacific will probably stay fairly active over the next week to 10 days. And while that does so, the Atlantic probably will stay kind of quiet. However, I do want to draw your attention to that tropical wave right there. It is going to make its way through the Caribbean, and we do have to watch it once it gets within this window. That is where we do have abundant moisture. The relative humidity is much higher in the mid-levels, and we are much closer to where we all are. And it'll pass through areas through here with rain and squalls and things like that. Those are impacts, but don't sleep on these systems. You remember Harvey? Just as an example, it came through, it died out, it was like gone, 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 popped again, and then came up here and made history. Yes, it can happen very, very fast. We have to remember that. These can happen very quickly. What the models don't show today doesn't matter. 5 to 7 days from now, when a hurricane is coming your way, the models are not the forecast, they're just guidance. And, hey, to that end, let's see what's happening out there. That's what, the dry air, you can literally see it on the modeling here. The guidance, as it were, that's the brown areas. Very low relative humidity values in the mid part of the atmosphere. The greens are your more moist areas, but they're still not that substantial just yet. And you can see our tropical waves. There's one right here. There's the other one. And a lot of dry air to the north. And it's very prevalent, absolutely. So let's just see what happens over the next week or so as we scooch this out into time. There's that first tropical wave right there. It starts to go into the Caribbean and through the Caribbean, where it starts to amplify a little bit. You can see that right here. Still kind of stretched out. There's another piece of energy there. But then look at that. All that dry air down there, that's August 13th. Yeah, that's not going to do it. You're not going to get any development when you see something like that. Another big clue is you got to get this surface high maybe a little bit more north and east to kind of let off on the pressure down here and allow some of that more moist air to come in. In other words, the higher pressure is creating the drier, squashed environment. And we just got to move through time where that high moves farther to the north. We call it the subtropical high, and that sort of lets up on those pressures a little bit, and you are off to the races when that happens more often than not. Now, I said all this about the dry air. Matt Clemens, one of our supporters and great friend of the project out in California. My mind, so much to say. He's in Colorado. He's probably going to go, oh, no, not California. Nothing against California. He's just very happy in Colorado. We were talking last night about some of the tweets and everything that went around after the aircraft went out and measured that very low relative humidity in the deep tropics. And we were thinking, well, what does it even look like out there when you get like an Irma or I'm trying to think of another long track hurricane. They're so few and far between these days. Ivan in 2004. And it was like, can we go back and look at what the relative humidity was when those were around? And I thought, well, why even worry about looking something up from long ago? Let's just go look at Dora in the eastern Pacific, because it's cruising along at darn near Category 5 intensity. And he said, yeah. So we went over to Tropical Tidbits. There's Dora, southeast of Hawaii by a very safe margin. Cruising along there, small hurricane. 968 analyzed on the GFS, very well developed, yep. And this is the surface map, of course. So what does it look like at the level of the atmosphere that we just looked at for the deep tropical Atlantic? Pretty much dry air everywhere. Like, what gives? Like, how do you explain that? Look at all that dry, stable air all around Tiny Dora there. Some back to the east of it, certainly some moist air. But I don't know. I don't have an explanation, and neither did Matt. We're like, what? The water temperatures through here are warm, but they're not excessively warm. In fact, that is sitting down here at, we'll just call it 13 north and 150 west. Let's look at this. 13 north would be roughly, let's see, 150 is right there. So it's sitting about right here. Yeah, water temperatures are right at normal or maybe just a little bit cooler, and it's going to be headed towards cooler water. Dora will. So how do you explain that? How is it a Category 3 or 4, almost a 5 yesterday, but then this in the Atlantic, I just don't know. That's what I mean. The weather sometimes, who knows? Anyway, let's move along to severe weather, because this is happening very soon. I'm sure all of you that watch this kind of stuff are already very well aware of it. But this is the infographic that CJ made up for us. Huge problem coming up, especially for the area in red there, the moderate risk, mainly for wind, but don't discount that and say, the tornado and hail threat, no big deal. Still could be plenty of those, but that straight line wind damage from this big line of storms that's going to come through. I've been up to that area. You got the Appalachians through there. You got these cities that are along the I-95 corridor and either side of it by many dozens of miles, with lots and lots of fully leafed trees, big trees, right? And those are going to come down. You're going to have a big area of power outages. It's going to be happening near and in the vicinity of the long, painful rush hour. Oh my goodness, I can just imagine from Richmond to D.C. and all that area, I-95 and all that Beltline area, the 495, the 395. Man, my heart's with you guys. It is going to be a rough evening for you, so just be patient. Stay home if you can. Avoid it. Whatever you got to do. That's going to be pretty nasty when it's all said and done. This is what it looks like over at the Storm Prediction Center. I love their graphics. You can click on it. Look at all those tornado watches already. Severe thunderstorm watches flanking on the south side. It's coming, so you guys be ready for it. By the way, this is what the HRRRRRR model shows. The high-resolution rapid refresh model, there's your thunderstorms in the model developing now. And as we move this out over the next few hours, this gives us an idea. There's that squall line right there moving through D.C. right there. What time is this? This is right about 6 p.m. Eastern. Ugh, yuck. And then in the Piedmont of the Carolinas, this could be also a big problem coming out of the mountain areas. So just be ready for this as this line sweeps through. Just one of the models here, the HUR, showing what could happen over the next few hours. So, wow. It'll be interesting to watch as that unfolds on social media. All right? So anyway, there's my update for today. Some of the stuff that I look at. My colleagues and I are looking at all this. As I showed you, a lot of people watching and seeing. But, at the end of it all, it's only August 7th. We have a long way to go. A lot can happen in September and October. That El Nino is trying to make more inroads, but as we've talked about so many times, it is battling against that very warm Atlantic. So many anomalies, so many unprecedented things going on. Maybe we're just playing with a whole new set of rules this hurricane season. We will have to just wait and see, and that's what at least one of the more interesting aspects of this work is all about. I don't know everything, neither do you. We will just watch and see as it all happens, I guess, together. All right, and with that piece of wisdom, you guys have a great rest of your Monday. As always, thanks for tuning in and giving me a part of your day. I appreciate it. I also hope you learned something, as always, as well. That's it. Let's get this online for you. I'm Mark Sudduth, Hurricane Track. I'll be back with more for you tomorrow afternoon.